Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anne O'Connor. I'm the Executive Officer at Troella. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for our webinar, Winter Ready, Managing Your Thoroughbred Over the Winter Period. I would also like to thank Arc Equine for coming on board tonight to deliver this webinar. So just in relation to Troella, we were founded in 2020 and our mission is threefold. We connect racehorse owners, breeders and trainers with people who wish to retrain or take on a thoroughbred when it's finished its racing career. We support these people with their new racehorses in terms of creating educational programs, sponsorship of many disciplines, and then also through different programs like our showing pathway, and again, like our webinars tonight. And also, we like to promote the achievements of thoroughbreds. It was always kept quiet in past years, but we want it out there in the public how versatile a thoroughbred is and their ability to perform different disciplines. Tonight, again, as I say, we'd like to thank Arc Equine for coming on board to deliver it. And our two speakers are, first of all, we've Kirsty McCann. And Kirsty is the Equine Nutritional Manager for Arc Equine in Ireland and in the UK. She started her career as a lead equine nurse at an equine referral hospital on the Curragh. She's more recently a nutritional manager at an equine supplement business, and she now leads the team at Arc Equine experts to advise, educate and support the equine community, as I say, in Ireland and in the UK, and she'd be well known among the industry. And joining Kirsty tonight is Dr. Ian Roundtree, MVB. Ian has grown up breeding and competing horses. He has recently transitioned from a clinical practice of about 12 years to join Arc Equine, and so he brings with him a wealth of experience. We would just like to advise people that we are recording this session so that we can send it out and disperse it among the people who are here tonight, just to remind you of that. And we would ask you to turn off your mics until the Q&A session, and then we can turn them back on. And if you have any questions, you can put them to our panel. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Kirsty and to Ian, and thank you again for attending.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I suppose, first of all, we both like to say thanks for having us. We've done one of these webinars with you guys before, and it was a real success, and we really enjoyed it. And I'm delighted to have Ian with me tonight to do this one. So from my own point of view, Arc Equine has been in existence, I suppose, for just a little over a year, and it's been quite the year that we've gone through. So, you know, our big part of our ethos is to support the people within the industry. So we have a very direct route into the kind of the staff within the industry, and we support them in many ways. But what we also want to do is support the animals, I suppose, that we've been dealing with from a performance point of view, maybe while they've been in training, through into their second career. You know, I don't necessarily use the word ex-racehorse too often. These horses, they're just gone on to another role within their life stage, and you know, having Troella there to guide on how to do it has been you know, hugely beneficial to everybody in the industry. So tonight we're going to talk about managing your thoroughbred through the winter. And for me, I get an awful lot of questions around, you know, how do we maintain weight? How do we maintain condition? How do we keep our horses happy during the winter? And that's not just across thoroughbreds, that's across all types of horses. But our thoroughbreds especially can throw up a few individual challenges in themselves. So we've got a few slides, not too many. We're not going to be terribly heavy on, you know, lots of complex information. But what we want to do is leave everybody with some really practical tips to help you manage your horses throughout the winter. So we're going to kick it off with looking at the first section, which is the environmental factors. So I suppose within that, Ian, we're really talking about kind of the weather being your main environmental factor and the challenges that come along with that, and how our horses manage with those challenges. And I suppose it's the winter is known for two things: wet and cold.
Absolutely, definitely in this country anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose probably the most logical place to start is, how do our horses keep warm?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we all know, and anyone who's had a horse for any length of time, and I mean, thoroughbreds are no exception to the rule, you'll get, we'll say, a summer coat and a winter coat. And obviously, we'll say, as horses start to coat out and develop their winter coat, it's a much heavier coat, and it's designed in nature to trap heat and to trap air in amongst the coat and generate heat. So it is there in itself. And I suppose horses in the wild, they're not going to have rugs. And I suppose we put a picture up here of a horse with loads of rugs on it. So we have, and I suppose in a lot of respects, just let people into the waiting room, sorry. In a lot of respects, we can see that horses probably don't need rugs. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think we're probably guilty of maybe over rugging in a lot of cases. And, because we're cold, we think our horses are cold as well. And, they are designed, as you say, they're very clever. Like their coat has a role to play. Protects them. But the way the hair then reacts to the temperature outside, the way it stands up and, creates that kind of, filling of heat, if you like.
Yeah, that like little insulation layer.
Insulation layer, exactly, yeah. So they are good. They're made to and designed to be out in all weathers, and they certainly don't dissolve in rain. So, I would tend to see more problems from over rugging than problems from under rugging. Yeah. Let's just say.
No, absolutely. No, definitely. And I suppose if you have your horse and you're clipping your horse, that's probably one of those needs that we may say, right, there probably isn't not an absolute need for a rug, but based on environmental conditions, and obviously we'll say if we're getting a real cold spell or anything like that, we might say absolutely rugging, it would be thoroughly advisable in those kinds of
and rugging appropriately. So having the right fill of rug, right type of rug, and that your horse is not going to be too cold nor too warm. So as well as their coat playing an important role in how to keep that animal warm, they have an internal radiator built in.
Okay.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that later on when we're talking about feeding, but their hindgut essentially acts as a radiator.
Yes.
So during the winter, horses will burn more calories, if you like, and it is really burning more calories. And that plays an important role in trying to keep them warm as well.
Yeah, so as they're actually digesting and we'll say using up that quantity of food, and as their hindgut, and I suppose what we would talk about if you want to go really scientific and technical on it, their cecum is their big hindgut fermenting. Absolutely. It's like a big vat, and it's going to generate an awful lot of heat and energy from there. And we'll say that obviously is it's like a central heating system almost, isn't it?
Absolutely, and we have to feed accordingly to allow for. If we continue to feed our horses the exact same way during the winter as we are during the summer, we might notice that natural reduction in weight on the animal at that point, because they are burning more calories to keep warm.
Of course.
So we'd often have the comment, and people would say it to me, is, the weight is blown off them based on the cold weather and a cold wind. And it is true. So you do have to factor in that if the temperature is dropped, you are accordingly increasing the forage intake or maybe the feed intake to then help with that burning of calories that the horses are doing to keep warm. And I suppose it is important at that point as well to mention horses that are outside are able to move around as well.
Yes.
And they can keep warm by
generating heat.
They're generating heat by moving. Whereas if we've got horses stood in a stable and they're not moving, we might be like, oh, well, they're much warmer because they're in the stable. But when you actually check temperatures, like unless you've got wind chill and rain to factor in, they may not be any warmer staying in the stable.
No, true.
So and when we talk about rugging as well, we have to consider the conditions that we're putting the skin underneath the rug. And I know we're going to move on now. We're going to talk about some of the wet conditions that might influence our horses during the winter months. And everybody knows and has heard of the dreaded mud fever and white legs and pink skin and the problems that can cause. And we'd see an awful lot of mud fever and we'd see an awful lot of rain scald. So Ian, do you want to just explain to us what those two conditions are?
Yeah, so I suppose particularly in this country and definitely in the weather we're having so far at the moment, unfortunately, you're probably going to see an increased incidence and rate of both of these conditions, both rain scald and mud rash. They're both actually caused by the exact same bacterial infection. So it's a bacteria called Dermatophilus. So it is, and what that does is it proliferates under certain conditions. And so basically with rain scald, what we will typically see, and that it's caused by prolonged wetting of the hair. That doesn't mean necessarily that every horse that is stood out in rain for a long period of time is going to develop this problem, but it can precipitate it as an issue, so it can. What we tend to see is that the affected areas mimic the runoff areas, so water runoff areas. So you will see it if you look at the second image there. It's along the back, unless I suppose where you sit the saddle and maybe the top of the rump will be the typical areas that are affected. Unfortunately, what you will get with a lot of these guys is that if you have a horse that's really badly affected, that skin, those lesions, for want of a word, will coalesce, so they'll all aggregate together, and the skin actually can feel quite cardboardy and quite thick and uncomfortable. So you can imagine this animal, we'll say this horse trying to move underneath that, it has to be very sore and painful. So it does. So it's something that if we can prevent, prevention is obviously, with all of these things, is better than cure, definitely. So it's knowing, I suppose, the predisposing factors and stuff and trying to alleviate away from that. Mud rash, on the other hand, then, we're going to get fields that are cut up a lot, particularly this year because we had such a dry summer. And then water is really just sitting on ground level. We're getting an awful lot of surface water. I know even at home, in the paddocks at home, definitely, middle of last week, there was biblical amounts of rain that it was like Noah was building his ark, so he was up in Cavan, so he was last week. So there's definitely, when you're seeing surface water lying for long periods of time, if horses are out in those paddocks, they're going to churn up the ground, they're going to dig it up. And those kind of, we'll say, damp, wet, muddy conditions are really going to be prone for those kind of mud rash type things. It's affecting your lower limbs, typically below the hocks, with the hind quarters, the hocks of the behind the pasterns are most commonly affected. So it is. And as Kirsty already alluded to, pink skin. Pink skin is sensitive. We see it in summertime, and we're very, very well aware that pink skin on nose and horses with a pink skinned nose are very prone to sunburn. And we are well aware of those facts. And oh, sorry guys, we've lost that for a second. I'm going to get everything back here now. While we admit people, again, good old technology. But we know that with the likes of mud rash and stuff like that, there are treatments out there and everything like that. A lot of these things can become secondary affected. So staphylococcal, streptococcal infections can cause bigger problems with these. And as a result, some, I won't say all, but some of these things may require antibiotics and stuff like that. So you may require, veterinary intervention and things like that.
Okay, so from a practical point of view, if we have horses that, and rain scald is probably a term, maybe, it doesn't just mean it's being caused by rain. It's just, rain scald or any scalding across their back. And you will tend to see, horses that have maybe been over rugged, too heavy a fill rug coming out of the winter or coming into the springtime, and where you've got these days where they're quite cold at night, but the sunshine can actually be quite warm during the day, and the horses sweat up underneath these rugs. And you end up getting, the exact same effect as you would. It's the same conditions. So you've got this damp, humid condition that fungal spores love to grow and develop in. So you end up with these scabs across their back and things like that. And, with anything like that, you have to be quite careful about how you manage it and how you treat it and how you handle it. So, if it is a case where you've got an animal where they've got rain scald or the scabs across their back underneath their rug, washing it in a suitable wash, making sure it's dry, putting on a barrier cream, things like that, moisture, getting good quality moisture back in, like into the skin, like a moisturizing cream would be really important. And then with the likes of the mud rash, dry. If you're washing their legs and washing them even with like mild hippie scrub dilutions and things like that, making sure that leg is dried really well. So like microfiber cloths are really, really good. Before you put any topical cream. Like any topical creams, definitely, as Kirsty says, going on a mud rash area,
it needs to be going onto a dry zone. So it does to have proper effect. Like you can see in the picture we have, and that's from a clinical case that was seen. I think that was one you saw back in practice, actually, Kirsty, possibly. And you can see how moist it looks and how we'll say that those moist environments, they're active breeding grounds for bacteria and stuff. So like just from a very practical point of view, if you clean that down, we do want to dry that off as much as possible before putting anything. Because if you're putting your topicals on top of that, on top of this as it is, it's not going to have huge effect. No. It might have some, but we'll say to get the most out of what you're going to do, without a doubt, I suppose it's doing some of the pre-treatment. So that's for want of a word.
And you know, mud rash, cracked heels, it's an extremely sore condition.
Oh, yes.
And it's not too far off being something more serious, the likes of a lymphangitis or something like that. So, you know, getting in, managing it nice and early, and, you know, taking time after you've ridden or when your horse comes in out of the field, you know, using things like Vaseline as a barrier if you're then going into a sand arena, you know, to just protect it, put a layer on. If you're using bandages and things like that, or boots, making sure that they're really clean and dry before they go on. It's really, really important.
I suppose if you want to humanize it a bit, you wouldn't want to be going out for a walk and putting on wet socks.
No, exactly.
So I mean, it's using a little bit of common sense and saying like, look, you wouldn't put something like that on yourself, so you wouldn't like that. So yeah, it can be prevented, a lot of these things, and definitely, as Kirsty says, catching something like this early can stop a bigger problem down the line.
Okay. We're going to move on now, and we're going to talk about your horse's mental well-being. And you know, we have spoken about in our previous webinar about when we get these horses out of training, and into their new environment. That is a shift in their mentality. It's a shift in how they've been managed. They really love routine. They're used to being stabled maybe for long periods of time, but going out at very set times for exercise and things like that. So we may have had a horse that's come out of training. They've had lots of downtime during the summer, out in the paddock and everything. And now all of a sudden, because we're trying to conserve our paddocks on our ground, they may be then back into a stabled environment, and that might be a challenge for them to manage. So what we want to talk about now is how do we manage that, and what could be the effects of that shift again, and how that stress can affect them. So like we've said, you've maybe had the summer where you've had your horses out, they're going to be in for longer periods of time. And that could be that they're in 23 hours of the day and they're only getting to go out when you're riding them. And even being able to do something as simple as going for a pick of grass, you know, later in the day, even if it's only at the weekends and things like that, can be great for them mentally. And having company while they're in their stable, so being in a yard with other horses is great for them because they are herd animals. If you do have the luxury of turnout, it's brilliant. They're not going to dissolve in the rain. You know, a bit of bad weather is not going to be any harm to them. And if you've got an all-weather turnout paddock, again, that's amazing, but not everybody has the luxury of that. But if you do have things like walkers and stuff like that, do utilize them just to get your horses out as much as possible. It is a big thing now within the sport horse world, and you'd see it when you go around to shows and things like that, toys within their stables.
Oh,
so,
yeah,
you know, the jolly balls,
yeah.
You know, they can be a good investment, and it can be a way of keeping them occupied a little bit. But when we have horses that are stable for a period of time and they are stressed, then they are at increased risk of things like gastric ulcers. And we do have to make sure that we are, you know, supporting our horses through this period of time and maybe trying to mitigate against these problems. So Ian, do you want to just give us a brief overview of what gastric ulcers are?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose gastric ulcers, horses in general are extremely prone to gastric ulceration. And what you'll find is that actually racehorses are massively overrepresented in that population. There's a study done, and I think it said 93% of racehorses have shown evidence of gastric ulceration at one point in their lifetime. What we normally talk about when we refer to gastric ulcers, so the stomach of a horse is broken into kind of two main areas. You've got a glandular region and a non-glandular region. The glandular region produces acid and is involved in obviously food breakdown and everything like that, and it starts the enzymatic process of food digestion. But what can happen is, I suppose, horses have naturally developed as trickle feeders. And what we mean by that is they will graze for anything up to 16, 17 hours a day if given the chance to do that. And as such, their stomach is actually quite small. So it's not designed to take in large quantities at, we'll say, over a small period of time. It's designed to take in small quantities over a long period of time. And with that, what you will get is horses can actually produce up to 16 gallons of acid over a 24-hour period. That is a huge quantity of acid that can be produced. So if their stomach is empty for really long periods of time, you have a lot of acid just sitting there in the stomach, churning around. And what we talk about, back to when we talk about the ulcers, we usually see most ulcers on the non-glandular portion, which is, just where the esophagus comes in, so that's your food pipe, comes in and hits the stomach. And actually, I'm just going to flick on briefly to the next slide, because you can see we have a little diagram of, we'll say, stomach down here. So this is what we refer to as the non-glandular region here. And this is where we see most ulcers. And if you hear, and maybe you've heard in the past people talking about scoping your horse and like looking and doing, we'll say, a gastroscope, they'll look and they'll grade gastric ulcers and things like that. There's lots of things we can do to kind of prevent and, we'll say, guard against gastric ulceration. And obviously, if we've diagnosed gastric ulcers, typically they will require some treatment, but there's lots of supplements and everything we can look at and putting them on as a precautionary method in reducing the incidence and the effects of those gastric ulcers. But one of the things in particular we can definitely do in terms of their mental well-being, and Kirsty alluded to the stress a lot of horses do seem to, be under when they come, particularly when they go from that, I've been outside for massive periods of time and now I'm going to be housed for a prolonged period, is we can actually look at the role of cameras.
Yeah, and cameras are something that we talk about an awful lot within the nutritional side of the industry, and where cameras can be a benefit and how to use cameras correctly. And I suppose the first thing I would have to say is the role of a camera should never be long term.
No.
Okay, so it should be used to get you over a period of stress or over a problem, and then reduce it down to hopefully get it out of the diet. It shouldn't be something that you really have to rely on to be able to ride your horse. If your horse is that bad, then there's probably another underlying issue that you should be addressing. So
it's not something we want to use as a crutch, I suppose, really. It's one of those things, it's to get us over a bit of a hump. Exactly.
And when we talk about cameras during the winter, and for horses that are in and they're stressed, they can just help to alleviate that tension, I suppose, that they're holding, and that stress that they're feeling. And, there's lots of different cameras out on the market, and we're not going to stand here and say which one's better or the other. But what I will say is they all kind of contain similar ingredients. Okay, so all cameras generally will either be of herbal base, or they'll be a more kind of, functional nutritional base. So there'll be B vitamins. We leave the herbal ones to the side for 1 minute, but the more commonly used ones that you'll see will be the ones that will have B vitamins, magnesium, and L-tryptophan in them. B vitamins are very important, that if they're, if horses are, they're lacking in B vitamins, it can lead to nervous tension. L-tryptophan is a really interesting one, because what that is that's the precursor to serotonin, which is like the happy hormone.
Yes.
And it basically chills them out a little bit. And then magnesium for, for the nervous system, to help support their nervous system. And then you've got really novel ingredients like, lemon balm and things like that increase the level of GABA within the brain, and that helps then to calm out and cool out the nervous system.
Yeah, so presumably something that, if, like, let's say a product that would combine like the likes of GABA and magnesium, for talk's sake, would be a very good combination, because obviously, as you say, the magnesium is so important in nervous function.
Yeah.
And then you've got that GABA effect as well. So like our combination cameras are good.
Yeah, I think they are, because, you're kind of coming in, maybe some horses are not deficient in magnesium.
Yeah.
So there's something else within that camera that is going to support them, or maybe they're not deficient in B vitamins. So, having something else, be it L-tryptophan or, something like GABA, you do have a whole range of herbal ones, and you've got calming cookies, and there's loads of things on the market now. What I would say is to anybody who's choosing to use a camera, look at your diet as a whole, and we're going to talk about diet in a little bit. And there's no point in putting a camera into a diet that's really high in energy to try and calm down a horse. Look at your diet as being your primary, and that can make all the difference. Don't be wasting your money on a camera if your diet is working against the temperament of your horse. But if you do use a camera, you can use them very effectively, especially during a winter period. and you can then reduce them out as needed, you know, as your horse gets more able to cope with the situation. And then you can increase it then maybe if you're going to a show at a weekend and you want to have a little bit more in there.
Yeah, and I suppose the whole function of the camera is to get over those anxious periods and reduce anxiety and make your horse better able to cope with those conditions. We're not looking at a camera as a sedative.
No, absolutely not.
So we're not. And I suppose that's a lot of people maybe have that thought of, oh, I'm going to calm, but really they're thinking, oh, well, he's going to be half sedated.
And on that note, the amount of people who've said to me, can I use a camera to clip my horse because he doesn't like to be clipped? Don't ever get yourself in a position where you're going to get hurt. If your horse needs to be sedated to be clipped, get it sedated by the
Absolutely.
You know, no amount of magic or anything is going to take care of that.
No,
but
definitely not.
I will give you one piece of, you know, a trick I would use with a lot of thoroughbreds when I'm clipping them as I plug their ears.
Yeah.
And it does help a good bit. So and it's something that racing yards do quite frequently when they're clipping them. I clip them with a hood on and things like that. So, you know, I've had a couple come out of training, we've done that, and they've been like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Look, that's a very handy little thing that I suppose a lot of people wouldn't really think about.
Yeah, so plugging their ears seems to work quite well. Okay, will we move on? So this is something we've had a few questions that have come in to Anne about, and that is maintaining condition during the winter. And as we already mentioned, you know, we're in a position where horses are using their hind gut to ferment, to use the calories that they're getting, to create heat to keep themselves warm. Okay, so if you've got a horse that's kind of losing weight or would tend to lose weight in the winter, don't wait till they've lost it.
Yeah.
Be proactive, know what's about to happen. And if I can give everybody one piece of advice to walk away from with tonight, that has to be know how good your hay is. If you have good quality hay, that is going to take care of an awful lot of your feeding for your thoroughbred during the winter. It is possibly the best €45 you'll ever spend.
Okay.
To go and take a hay sample and send it off to the equine centre and get them to do a nutritional report on it, then bring it back. We would be more than happy then to look at the results and then help you formulate a diet to suit your horse over the winter, okay? We're in a country where we grow, and this year we grew exceptional hay, and the quality of that hay actually can be quite calorific. Knowing the quality of your hay can save you an awful lot of money on hard feed. So I would often go in and we might do some hay analysis in a yard, and it could be as simple as saying, you're not feeding enough hay. We feed more hay. We solve the problems around weight loss and things like that. But it's not costing them a huge amount of money by putting in an awful lot of hard feed and an awful lot of supplements. So I spoke to the equine centre this morning. I said I was coming on this webinar today, and I said, would you mind if I suggested to everybody to get their forage checked? And if you have any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to answer them. But knowing what your hay is like quality wise and the nutritional value of that hay will save you money in the long term. And the other thing is forage, hay, haylage. It's the best thing to feed your horses because they are trickle feeders. They will eat, they will produce saliva, they will buffer their own stomach. There's so many benefits to feeding plenty of hay ad lib.
Huge benefit overall to the entire digestive health.
Yeah.
And as we already talked about in terms of gastric ulceration, it can be one of the best safeguards against, particularly during housing periods. And if we hit a very bad winter and you weren't able to get horses out to pasture, I mean, like we say, this kind of type of feeding, as Kirsty says, really can safeguard against without doing a whole lot extra.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of if we were going down the new nutritional analysis of your hay, kind of what kind of stuff would the equine centre be looking at? I suppose if I was sending you sample to them, what would I see on my report?
So when you test forage, you're able to essentially say how digestible it is.
Okay.
You can tell from the results when it was cut. Basically, you can say if it was an early cut or a later cut, you know, depending on the results you're getting. The digestible energy, so the calorie content of it, how, you know, whether it's suitable for hard-working horses, you know, breeding stock, things like that. Your minerals as well, so looking at things like copper, zinc, calcium, phosphorus, you're looking at those things. You can go another step on and look at the quality of the hay as well from a hygiene point of view. So, you know, if you've got horses with respiratory problems, you can look at the quality of the hay and see whether or not there's, you know, moles, aspergillus, things like that. And if there is, there's ways of treating that hay, if you like, through steaming, so that you're making that hay better for your horse to take on board.
Okay.
And if we look at your thoroughbreds, and we're just going to put a blanket figure across them, that they're about, you know, 450, 500 kilos, that would mean that you should be feeding about 7.5 kilos of forage a day. So anywhere between 1.5% to 3% body weight.
It's a lot of hay.
It's a lot of hay. And when you actually get down to, very few people actually feed that volume of it, right? So, you know, the benefits of feeding the hay are, as we've already spoken about, are really important. Now, the odd time I do get somebody who'll tell me my thoroughbred's actually a really good doer. So, you know, they're hard to keep the weight off of, and the opposite side. And I would always say, don't ever stop them from eating hay.
Yes.
So things like, you know, restrict their hay access, but keep it going into them by a small hold hay net and things like that can be really, really beneficial. A good thing to do if you're feeding square bales, small square bales, or if you're feeding large, you know, round bales or whatever, is weighing how much, you know, a flake of hay is. And that generally involves the person having to bring the old kitchen or the bathroom scales down to the yard, standing on it yourself, standing on it with the hay, subtracting one from the other, and then you get an idea. You can then estimate how heavy a flake of hay is, and then you can kind of eyeball it for the rest of the winter. You don't need to do that every time, or you can weigh a hay net or whatever. But yeah, you're talking in and around 7.5 kilos of forage. And I'd be really interested, and anybody who's online, if you go into the comment section, if you can kind of be pretty honest about it and say, are you feeding that much hay? That would be really interesting for us to see.
It certainly would. I mean, like, when you say 7.5 kilos, it's a lot. It's an awful lot of hay to feed.
It's a lot.
Really is. And I mean, definitely you don't want to be giving 7.5 kilos of fairly poor standard, poor quality hay then, because if you're taking in such a vast quantity, and that's where the quality comes in.
Like that, if you know that your hay has got really good digestible energy and, you know, it'd be quite calorific, then you might not have to feed 7.5 kilos worth either. So we can estimate, once we get the report back, we can tell you how much hay you should be feeding. When we're talking about ex-race horses, we tend to blanket recommend a diet being, you know, high fiber, high oil, low starch, and low sugar. And that's based on the fact that we want to encourage slow release energy. And most people who have ex-race horses will be feeding that type of diet. So be it, you know, Horse Care from Red Mills, or Resolve or Relieve, or Freedom from Gain, or whatever. That tends to be the diet a lot of people will use. And that's an excellent diet. Because what that does is it gives slow release energy over a period of time. So when you've got feed that's high in grain, you've got high levels of starch and high levels of sugar. And what that does is it breaks down, the body breaks down starch and sugar into glucose. And then, a bit like a child getting a sugar rush, and the glucose is, you know, a form of quick release energy. So you get these peaks and troughs, if you like, of lots of energy, and that's where you get excitability, hot temperament, and spooky. Whereas if you're feeding the opposite, which is the higher fiber diet, so high fiber, high oil diet, it's much more slow release energy. So you're getting this more level amount of energy being released over a period of time.
I suppose more predictable.
Exactly, more predictable. Now, when during the summer, a common problem that I would come across would be that, you know, they're out on grass, they're getting plenty of grass, you know, they're maintaining weight, and a lot of people would reduce the amount of hard feed they'd be feeding, but they may be including a balancer in the diet. And balancers are fantastic ways of ensuring that your horses are getting vitamins, minerals, and amino acids. Okay, if you've got a horse that's carrying a lot of condition and you don't want to put a lot of calories in through hard feed, by feeding a balancer, you're able to give them all of those nutrients that they need without all of the calories. Now, the one thing about that is, remember that when you're going into the winter months, they aren't high in calories. So therefore you do need to have to get calories back into the diet at that point. So just bear in mind when you're coming into the winter months, if you are on a heavy weighted diet towards a balancer, you need to adjust that to allow the calories to come in. And doing that through cubes and mixes are, you know, the way to go. Generally your cubes be slightly lower in starch than your mixes would. So either or is a, you know, a good option. But I would say if you're not doing a huge amount of work, try and get away from any high starch, high sugar diets and get them down onto that high fiber, high oil diet. One thing I really want to talk to people about is, because it actually came up in a question that came in to Anne, was about feeding an oil as an energy source. Okay. Oil is a great slow release energy. All right. Now, I would categorize oil into maybe 3 kind of columns, if you like. So you have your 50, 60 mils of oil that you'd feed every day. That's not going to do a huge amount for energy.
Okay.
That's going to be for your coat health, your bit of digestive health and things like that. Okay. So that shine that you want. If you want to feed oil as an energy source, you are going to have to feed between 250 and 500 mils a day, which is an awful lot to ask a horse to eat. And it's not going to be terribly palatable, especially when you've got a fussy thoroughbred. It's a lot easier when you've got maybe, you know, kind of your more native breeds and stuff like that. And, you know, we would do these kind of oil-based diets for laminitics and stuff where we'd have, you know, energy coming in and that way instead of in starches.
Yeah.
So, but when you're talking about thoroughbreds, getting up to that 250 to 500 mil is going to be really, really difficult. And they're probably not going to eat it, let's face it. So then that comes into your third column, which is your high oil supplements. So that's the likes of your Bailey's Outshine, your, you know, kind of your soya supplements, things like that, where they've got high oil contents. Okay. So they're really good at putting extra condition and adding extra calories. And I often call them empty calories because they're not energy producing calories, if you like, in the same way that starches and stuff will be, but they can be ways of giving energy as well. So just to give you a kind of a rough, when you want to compare oils versus grains, 300 mils of an oil will provide similar amounts of calories as a kilogram of oats. Okay, so
that's a huge statistic.
Yeah, so just that's kind of when you want to go, if I want to feed oats or want to feed an oil for calories, 300 mil of oil, same as a kilo of oats. Okay, but when you feed these high levels of oil within the diet, you have to be really careful because the way oil is broken down by the diet, and we have to make sure that we have adequate amounts of antioxidants within the diet, and the most common antioxidant we talk about is vitamin E.
Yeah.
So Ian, do you want to just explain to us how that process happens?
Yeah, so when fats are broken down into their usable form, which is fatty acids, or I suppose what we would refer to as volatile fatty acids, they go through a process of oxidation. But during that process, you actually get what is produced is a thing called free radicals. So free radicals then can actually do damage to cell structure, DNA, and everything like that, and can cause inflammation. And so these free radical structure is what can create a problem. So and I suppose that's what we refer to in a lot of terms, and you may have heard this in human medicine even, is oxidative stress. So what your antioxidants do then, your vitamin E, if provided in sufficient levels, will come in and will mop up, can prevent the production of these free radicals, and will stop them from causing a lot of that cellular damage and can stop them from creating problems, I suppose, to your horse. And the balance of that along with your oils can just, I suppose, they marry in perfect harmony, I suppose, really, isn't it? Like it's just that perfect structure. So we can't stop a whole lot of oxidative process because that is just the breakdown of your fats. But I suppose what we're really looking for is the addition of the antioxidants into your feeds and into your supplements that are just going to help reduce their potential effects.
Yeah, so basically, if you're feeding anything over 100 mils of oil within the diet, you do need to supplement with vitamin E. And the guide on that is 100 international units of vitamin E for every 100 mils of oil. So if you're giving your normal 40, 50, 60 mils of oil within your diet for coat health, I wouldn't be saying you need to supplement with additional vitamin E because you've got the vitamin E going in through your feed, etc., etc. Whereas if you're then going for a higher oil diet, so if you're putting in things like your Outshine and stuff, just make sure you're hitting the antioxidants that you need to help prevent against that oxidative stress.
And in the likes of those now, Kirsty, would there be vitamin E added into them?
Some of them will have,
Some of them will.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Some of them will have, depending on the formulation, just look through the back of
Yeah.
the bag, and you'll be able to see it. A lot of people will feed micronized linseed oil,
Okay.
or sorry, micronized linseed, as instead of oil. Just remember, that's not actually terribly high in oil. It's only about 34% oil.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, you know, maybe going for a good quality oil instead would be a good idea. If your horse is losing weight more rapidly than it probably should be, do be conscious of any underlying reasons. If they're getting older, making sure their teeth are looked after is really, really important. If they're, you know, environmental factors with the weather, you know, if it's more than that, have a look for additional health issues. Horses with ulcers can look quite poorly as well. So being on top of that is really, really important. And it's also good to remember that it takes about 16 to 20 kilos of weight gain for a horse before you'll kind of visibly see a change in them. So don't expect it to happen overnight.
No,
you know,
I suppose
it can take 3 to 4 weeks before you start seeing the benefit of additional feeding.
And probably the easy trap to fall into then is when you're not seeing results immediately is to overfeed.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and I suppose that's what we don't want to create is a load of fat, overweight racehorses in stables when it comes to spring or anything like that. So I suppose the one of the questions that we always get asked is, look, can fat be turned into muscle? And I suppose, look, that's a common myth we just want to dispel. Fat is not muscle. They're two completely different cells. What your fat is doing is fat is there to provide, it's to store and release energy. So as a result of your overfeeding, and we'll say if we're providing too high a calorie diet, what's happening is if a horse is not using all those calories for, we'll say, their daily energy requirements, if they have a massive excess of that, they're going to lay down fatty tissue.
Yeah.
So they are. So it was and it does provide an insulation layer as well for them. Muscle, on the other hand, look, muscle is composed of cells that allow you to pick up something, allow you to pick up a pen, allows horses to move and everything like that. So they're completely different. So that's the one thing we would always say to people is not to think, oh, grand, he's fat now, we're going to turn that into muscle in the springtime. Just doesn't happen that way, unfortunately.
No. It's that balance between, if they are carrying a bit extra going in spring, that's not a problem because you're going to increase their workload and then they're going to start creating the muscle.
Absolutely.
And at that point, it is then reassessing the diet from your winter feeding. If you haven't been exercising as much and you're increasing their workload, so then maybe increasing their amino acid profile and stuff to help out with the building blocks for creating that muscle. Okay, we move on to the next bit.
Cool.
The final bit we're going to touch on is feet. And this is something that, you know, during the winter and, you know, because of the condition of our paddocks and things like that, we tend to lose a lot more shoes.
Oh, yes, very much so.
Now, we also, you know, some people do go barefoot. If your horses are off for the winter period, you may decide to take their shoes off them. No issues at all with any of that, but don't neglect the trimming and getting the farrier out on a regular basis, because that's what's going to keep the foot in good quality. So to take away any of that overgrowth, and anything that can kind of become brittle, cause cracks that can then lead to abscesses and things like that. So
prevention is always better when it comes to feet. Absolutely, like it's critical. I mean, you don't want to see a horse out there hobbling around on 3 legs or anything like that. And it's one of the common things, I suppose, horses are often referred to as having 5 hearts. So they are, because their feet actually work to pump blood back up from, we'll say, the periphery. So, I mean, good foot health is absolutely paramount, and unfortunately, seeing your farrier regularly probably isn't going to stop during that winter period. Will be fair to say, a lot of racehorses are quite imbalanced in their feet and stuff, we'll say. Like
it depends on the farrier.
Probably depends. Well, there you go. I mean,
a lot of our farriers
we won't start slagging farriery. But I mean, it just, if you're letting feet grow over long, we're going to get problems with cracks and everything like that.
Feet grow at 6 to 10 millimeters per month.
That's really quick.
So, you know, they do grow quite quickly, and you might notice it might slow down a little in winter, but generally not a huge amount. Like when we're talking about, if you've got horses that have soft, brittle feet, you know, nothing that you put on the foot is going to improve that really. You know, a lot of it's about suppleness and things, but it's what you put into the horses that's actually going to directly influence their hoof quality. So, you know, if you're using hoof supplements, use ones that are of good quality, make sure that they've got adequate amounts of biotin, zinc, methionine, copper as well is really, really important. So the hoof itself then is made up of keratin.
Yeah.
So
It's like our nails, our
which is the
fingernails.
protein.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, making sure that we're giving the foot the ingredients it needs to then be able to grow healthy and strong, is probably more important than anything that you can put on the foot.
Absolutely.
From
absolutely.
You know, and a topical.
It's growing and living.
Yeah.
So it is. So I mean, like, it's what goes into the horse is going to ultimately affect everything from that nature. So it is, rather than what goes on. We can make a hoof look very nice and pretty.
Yeah.
So we can, but let's say a lot of the oils may stop a little bit of drying out. So they may, but it's not going to prevent brittleness or anything like
Yeah,
that.
and I think probably in the winter months, the one condition we see more of would be thrush.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Because of the damp, wet conditions, and more often than not, it's hind feet that are affected and things like that. So getting the farrier out to cut away all that dead tissue is really, really important. And then how you manage that foot, keeping it clean, keeping the bedding clean underneath it.
And presumably regularly picking your horse's feet up and actually cleaning them out is of huge benefit then as well. Like doing that daily and everything as well. Not, I don't mean neglecting being the wrong word to use, but was actually actively promoting good health yourself in between those farrier visits.
Yeah, I go into a lot of yards and I can generally tell the general state of nutrition by looking at their feet.
Wow.
And if you go in and see a load of cracked feet, you know you've got an awful lot of work to do, because there's going to be a lot of other problems. If you go in and see brilliant, strong feet, it is a really good indicator of their general nutritional status.
Okay.
So yeah, so if you're using a hoof supplement, use good quality one. There are different types on the market now. You can get powders, you can get pellets, you can even get liquids, you can get oil-based ones. Use one that's good quality, you know, that is giving the recommended amounts of biotin that you need, so that to improve hoof quality. And you're not going to see any huge benefit of a hoof supplement until, you know, they've been on it for 3 to 4 months anyway.
Yeah.
Because it needs time for the fresh growth to come down. And
so starting early on any of these things really is your key. Is there a, not to put you on the spot now, Kirsty, and don't kill me, is there a recommended amount of biotin that would say, or is that just, will that come on the supplement kind of thing like that? If I'm getting it from my
15 to 20 mg per horse per day.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Not a huge volume.
I think
that's okay. We won't hold you to it.
Yeah, no. So biotin is a B vitamin.
Yeah.
So horses will produce B vitamins themselves through the process of digestion, of eating fresh forage and things like that. But generally, and especially at this time of year, because they're not having grass and things, a lot of horses will be deficient in B-vits. And B-vits are really, really important. They do a whole range of things, right down to if you have a horse that's deficient in certain B-vits, they have inappetence.
Okay.
So by increasing, like B1, for example, you can increase their appetite. So B-vits are really important during the winter. And be clever. If you're going to supplement with a B vitamin, see what else you can get in there.
Yeah,
absolutely. You know, like there's plenty of good quality products on the market. You know, we don't push our own products in these webinars because we want to give advice, but you know, on the conditions and things like that. But if anybody wants to talk about how best to supplement that, we're available to talk about that. So I think that's about it. Have we got any questions?
I will try and stop presenting. Now, there's no questions on at all by the looks of things.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yes.
But going back to you talking about the rugging of a horse for the winter, and it was one thing that I did see before was the fact that with our weather we can get very cold days, and then, as you say, we can get those warm days, and we're inclined to go out and buy the highest tog rug. And one thing that I did find was lumps under the rug.
Yeah.
Is there, I mean, should we change our rugs during the winter? I mean, sponge down the inside. You know, if you're talking about putting a horse out on grass, you could be talking about putting a horse out in November, maybe not bringing it in until February or whatever. And I know you'll go out and you'll check your rug every day, but the importance of taking off the rug, first of all, and looking at the horse underneath it. But should we, for hygiene point, would it be advisable to have a spare rug and maybe do a swap over at some stage?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so.
I don't think it's any harm.
It's no harm, and you're right. People tend to go out and buy the highest tog, and don't maybe necessarily factor in, you know, if their horse actually needs it. It is back to that whole I'm cold, so therefore my horse must be cold as well. And the fact that you found you had lumps, it's the horse's direct response to being overheated. And it's their way, you know, so what we used to call heat lumps, and there'll be various different reasons as to why they get heat lumps. Could be their overheating, protein level, things like that. So having a second rug is a great idea. And even if you've got a really nice day, and even in the middle of winter, I'd often do it. I'd go out, and if it's a nice dry day, crisp day, if they're not clipped, obviously, I'd take the rug off them, throw it over the gate with the inside out, just to air out the rug, air out the horse as well, if you like. And I think it's great for them to have a roll in the mud. That's just, you know, I think it's, you know, they're always terribly happy after they've done it. I know my own fella, the minute you put him in the field, he finds the biggest puddle he can. Oh, yeah. And you wouldn't want to be standing near him because you'd be soaked by it. But they just, and his whole head goes into it and everything, you can't tell. I would actually be a huge advocate, and I don't know if anybody else would agree with me, but I would use the lycra bodysuits with thoroughbreds quite a bit. You know, a lot of people think that they're just there for keeping them clean during show season or whatever, but I've actually found, and I'd have a couple of thoroughbred trainers would use them for horses in training, that they tend to get very warm in their stables. Instead of having two, like an under quilted rug and then they're over rug on them and they're just totally overheating, we'd have the likes of the lycra rug, which is quite close to the skin. And they tend to do really well with those on them. And then their normal rugs on top. But as far as cleaning a rug mid-winter or something like that, yeah, if you've got a second rug, absolutely no harm in being able to put it on. Or, you know, with my own fella, he never has a heavyweight rug on him. He goes between a lightweight and a medium weight. He just gets too hot with a heavyweight on him.
Is there a factor with regarding to the weight of the rug? The horse is carrying around this weight. You know, if we start piling on the rugs and we have a thoroughbred that's of a lighter frame and they're carrying this weight every day.
I'd say that was possibly more of a problem when we used to have jute rugs, where do you remember the real old jute rugs, which were really heavy, but they were brilliant. Nothing ever got wet under them, I'll tell you that much. They all stayed dry. I don't think so, because generally the rugs now don't hold the water. They just
tends to
run off them. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay.
Well, just have a question in there in the comments. Sarah asked, in the world of joint supplement brands, how many milligrams of glucosamine and chondroitin should we be buying in a product? What's a good product if we're allowed to comment?
Joint supplements are a little bit subjective. That's the first thing I'd say. And knowing what's wrong with your horse is probably the most important thing.
I think that reigns true for anything you're going to supplement for. It's a bit like, look, if you know the problem, it's probably, is there arthritis? Is there early onset arthritis? Is there something there that we're giving the joint supplement for?
Yeah.
You know, like, is it muscular or is it actual joints and stuff like that?
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to mention specific products. We can sell a product.
A good quality joint supplement will never be cheap. That's the first thing I'll say, because good quality ingredients that are protected through the stomach to be able to be absorbed, they are expensive. So if you're getting a joint supplement for 20 quid or 30 quid a tub, that's going to do you a month. It's probably not going to be a huge quality. Your joint supplements should contain glucosamine plus your hyaluronic acid or your chondroitin sulfate plus your hyaluronic acid. There's lots of different ones around, and I think probably it's a bigger question, and I'm happy to do up a fact sheet on joint supplements, and then you can circulate it to everybody, because there is an awful lot to talk about around.
Oh, I think you could do a whole talk.
The one thing I will say is the first place I always go is I tell people to feed a good quality oil. That is, the first thing you should always do for joints. So something where you've got a good omega-3/6 ratio is great for joint health.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that is an inexpensive way of doing it. And I think you're better off putting in something that's going to make a difference than something that's bad quality because it's cheap. So.
Cool. So second question there was, how much protein should a thoroughbred be getting during winter?
One size doesn't fit all. That's my first point. Protein is a really kind of interesting one, in that depending on the life stage of your animal, protein can be quite influential. So if you've got a young, growing, developing, so say you get a thoroughbred off the track and it was, no good as a 2-year-old and it's gone to find another job, or even a 3-year-old, they're not fully developed, okay? So feeding, you can get good 14% protein feeds that are not high in starch and high in sugar, they're fiber-based. And that protein is important for that animal for growth and development and muscle development and things like that. An older animal who's in the other end of their life stage, protein is required to maintain muscle mass. So they would, again, be your 14%. Everything kind of in between, you could have your 10%, your 12%, and they will do very, very well on them. So I hope that answers that.
Anyone have any other questions? No, that is okay.
Okay.
We do have a raffle prize. So I'm going to see, hopefully this will come into shot. The big bundle we've put together of some of the products that ARC offer. Can't really see it. Hang on, I can turn off this. Let me turn off this thing. Hang on a second now. Background.
There we go.
Now.
So it's a lovely hamper full of some of the stuff we've spoken about tonight. And Helga has drawn a winner.
And the winner of this lovely prize is Aoife Brady.
So, Aoife, if you want to send your address to Anne, she'll forward it on to us.
That's perfect. Listen, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and staying online. If anyone is interested in the recording, we have that, and we can forward that on to anyone through Anne probably as well, so we can. So
yeah. And what we'll do is, Anne, we'll do the fact sheet for you on the joint supplements, so you can circulate it to everybody. And then the other thing I'll do is just something on forage quality. And if you do want to go to the equine centre with a sample, I'll do just a how to take a sample and how to send it into them and all that kind of stuff. And we would be more than happy when you get your results to help you formulate your diets through your X-ray sources.
Okay, well, that would be fabulous. Listen, thanks a million, Kirsty and Ian. Thank you very much. And also Helga McKean in the background to put it all together in the marketing. A big help with putting tonight together. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. We got some sound information and great tips to help us with wintering our thoroughbreds. We'd like to wish you the best of luck with your horses. We would also like to, in terms of Trowella, remind everyone, if you would register your thoroughbreds with us on our website, because that helps us put together our program of events and sponsorships and clinics and webinars like tonight. So once we know what horses we have and what's required, we can put it on for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us through our website. And also just to let you know, 2 upcoming items on our schedule. On the 30th of November, we're having a show jumping clinic at JAG Equine with Sam Watson. And on the 15th of December, we're having our annual fundraiser, our Christmas show jumping pro celeb event at the Emerald in Enfield. And both of these are on It's Plain Sailing. So without further ado, I'd like to thank everyone for coming online tonight. I'd like to thank Arc Equine in particular, Kirsty, Ian and Helga, and say thank you very much and the best of luck with your thoroughbreds going forward.
Thanks very much. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you. Night now.
Thank you.